June 6, 1996. The night that would change everything. Two innocent children, just 6 and 5 years old, brutally murdered in their own home. A mother's desperate 911 call, her frantic screams echoing through the phone. They're gone. They're dead. A chilling crime that, on the surface, appeared to be the work of a savage intruder. But what if the real horror wasn't some faceless stranger? What if the monster wasn't hiding in the shadows, but standing right in front of us, living among us? What if the person responsible for the unimaginable suffering of 2 children was their own mother? This isn't just a case of a tragic crime. No, this story is far more complex, far more mysterious, because what followed that night wasn't just an investigation, but a gripping trial that would divide a nation and leave a haunting question in its wake. Was Darlie Routier the grieving mother she claimed to be, or was she a cold-blooded killer? The world watched as a quiet suburban mom, known for her loving, caring nature, became one of the most infamous criminals in America. A woman who, within weeks, would go from the face of a heartbroken mother, pleading for justice, to being labeled the villain in one of the most controversial cases of the decade. What would drive a mother to do such a thing? Or could it be that Darlie Routier was the victim of a broken justice system? A woman who was wrongly convicted, whose life was forever changed by a tragic set of events beyond her control. This is a story of shock, mystery, and unimaginable heartbreak. A case that raises as many questions as it answers. Stay with us as we delve deep into the chilling truth behind the case of Darlie Routier. One of the most talked about and contested criminal trials in American history. In the quiet, peaceful town of Rowlett, Texas, life seemed to move at its own gentle pace. It was the kind of place where families thrived, kids played in front yards, and neighbors knew each other by name. The kind of place where everyone believed nothing bad could ever happen, where crime felt like a distant problem, something that only existed in far-off cities on the evening news. It was in this very town, in the early 1990s, that Darlie Routier and her family found their home. Darlie was a 26-year-old mother, the heart of the Routier household. She was the kind of woman you might pass by on the street without ever thinking twice. Quiet, soft-spoken, and seemingly content with her life. She had everything any young mother could dream of, a life that appeared on the surface to be picture-perfect. Her husband Darren was a hard-working man, always striving to provide for his family. He spent long hours at his job, doing whatever he could to ensure that Darlie and their 2 sons, Devon and Damon, would never want for anything. And for the most part, Darren had everything she could need. Except perhaps a moment of peace amidst the busy, chaotic whirlwind of raising 2 young boys. Devon, the older of the 2, was a spirited 6-year-old with a love for sports. He was known for his infectious energy and his big heart. Damon, just a year younger, was his constant companion, always right there beside him, eager to share in every adventure and every laugh. The boys were the light of Darlie's life, the reason she got up every morning with a smile on her face. Together they made a family that seemed, by all accounts, like one straight out of a storybook. Darlie had chosen to stay at home, raising her boys in the comfort of their peaceful suburban neighborhood. The children attended school, played sports, and filled their days with typical childhood joy. There were no signs, no whispers or hidden warnings that anything dark was on the horizon. To outsiders, the Routier family appeared to have it all. In the evenings, when the workday ended and the kids were done with their sports practices, the Routier home became a sanctuary. Darlene would come home, and the family would gather around the dinner table, laughter filling the air. They were a family that seemed to be as normal as any other. Neighbors, if they looked in from the outside, would see a perfect picture of suburban life. Darlene was just another mum in a neighborhood full of them, trying to raise her boys with love, care, and the kind of devotion that any mother would understand. But beneath this picture-perfect exterior, there was a story that no one could have ever imagined. A story of heartache, loss, and a tragedy so senseless that it would forever change the lives of everyone involved. Rowlett, Texas, a town that had never known violence, would soon become the backdrop for one of the most shocking and debated criminal cases in American history. On the surface, it looked like the Routiers had everything anyone could wish for. But deep down, the cracks were already beginning to form, unnoticed by those who had no reason to suspect that the quiet, loving mother at the center of it all would one day become the face of a crime that no one could understand. It was just another night in Rowlett, Texas. Quiet, still, and ordinary. But that night would forever be etched in the memories of everyone who heard the story. June 6th, 1996. The time, just past 2:30 a.m. Darlie Routier, shaken and panicked, dialed 911, her voice cracked with hysteria as she cried out into the phone, "I need help. My children. They're bleeding. They're dead. Someone broke in. They're gone." Her voice trembled with fear and pain, the kind of pain no mother should ever have to endure. In the background, the sounds of frantic footsteps and screams echoed as the operator tried to make sense of the situation. Darlie said that an intruder had entered the house, attacked her, and then brutally stabbed her two young sons, Devon and Damon, as they slept on the living room couch. When the police arrived at the Routier home, what they found was both horrifying and puzzling. The house was a scene of chaos. Blood spattered across the carpet, the walls, the furniture. The children, Devon and Damon, lay motionless, victims of a savage attack. But what stood out to the officers was Darlie herself. She was injured, no doubt. There was blood on her arms, a wound to her neck. But strangely, she seemed calm. Too calm. In fact, her behavior didn't match the gravity of the situation. She wasn't crying hysterically. She wasn't inconsolable. Instead, she seemed almost detached, as if in a daze. The officers couldn't help but notice how unnerving it was. This mother, whose children had just been murdered, was eerily composed, as though the horror around her hadn't fully registered. And then there was the broken window. Darlie had claimed that the intruder entered through the window in the living room, but there was something off about the scene. The window was shattered, sure, but there were no signs of forced entry, no broken locks, no evidence that someone had used force to get inside. The investigators began to question Darlie's story. If the intruder had truly broken in, why was there no sign of struggle? Why hadn't the intruder taken anything, especially valuables that were easily accessible? As the investigation continued, the doubts grew. The crime scene didn't add up. How could someone break in, murder two children, and yet leave no trace of themselves behind? Even more disturbing, there was a sense that something was off about the way Darlie behaved in the hours following the attack. The police were beginning to focus on Darlie. Her actions, her demeanor, were not those of a grieving mother. In the days after the attack, security footage from a local store revealed Darlie laughing and chatting casually with neighbors. She appeared almost carefree, as if she hadn't just lost her children in a brutal and senseless act of violence. It was behavior that struck many as deeply unsettling. How could someone who had just suffered such a loss be so unaffected? But perhaps the most damning evidence came from an alleyway behind the Routier home. As detectives sifted through the area, they found something shocking: a bloody sock. It was found just yards from the house, discarded as if someone had hurriedly tried to dispose of it. A sock that was soaked in the blood of Devon and Damon. But why would a sock be found so far from the scene of the crime? What did it mean, and why hadn't Darlie mentioned it? The sock was just the beginning of the questions that would haunt the investigation. Was this a staged scene? Was this a cry for attention? Or, as Darlie had insisted from the start, had she truly been the victim of a random attack? a mother who had been targeted in a violent, unpredictable crime. The more the investigators dug, the more the story seemed to crumble. The physical evidence was in direct contradiction to Darlie's account of what had happened that night, and as they looked deeper into her life, they began to uncover a web of inconsistencies, strange behaviors, and unanswered questions. And so, the investigation took a chilling turn. Was Darlie the grieving mother she claimed to be, or was she hiding a much darker truth? The evidence, her behavior, the bloody sock, the lack of forced entry, raised doubts that would echo throughout the coming months. Was it possible that Darlie Routier was not the victim, but the perpetrator, a mother who had murdered her own children? The police had their suspicions, but the truth was still locked behind a veil of uncertainty, and the world, watching closely from the outside, waited for answers. Who could have done something so horrific? And, more hauntingly, why? As the investigation into the deaths of Devon and Damon Routier continued, the pieces of the puzzle began to shift in ways that no one had expected. What seemed like a random act of violence, a senseless tragedy, was slowly beginning to reveal a far more complicated and disturbing truth. The most chilling pieces of evidence was found in the alley behind the Routier home. A bloody sock. It wasn't just a sock that had been stained in the aftermath of the crime. It was soaked in blood. But what was it doing there? And why hadn't Darlie mentioned it? The sock wasn't just another piece of evidence. It was a symbol of something more sinister. Investigators began to wonder if Darlie had tried to stage the crime scene. If, in the frantic chaos of that night, she had been trying to cover her tracks, trying to make the crime look like a random attack. But there was something too deliberate about the way the sock had been discarded. Why would someone leave it so far from the scene of the attack? Was it planted? Or had Darlie, in a moment of panic, tried to dispose of it hastily, hoping it wouldn't be found? And then there was Darlie herself. As the investigation deepened, it became increasingly clear that her behavior after the murders was deeply unsettling. While the entire world mourned for the two innocent children who had been brutally taken from this world, Darlie's actions seemed to paint a different picture altogether. And then, witnesses began to speak out about her strange behavior in the days following the attack. Friends, neighbors, even family members noted that Darlie didn't seem to be grieving in the way they expected. While most mothers would be inconsolable, drowning in grief, Darlie was seen smiling, laughing, and even posing for photographs, a public image that would later haunt her for years to come. The most infamous of these photographs was taken at her son Damon's funeral. There, in front of the casket of her young son, Darlie flashed a smile for the camera, an image that would be seared into the minds of people across the nation. The photo was shocking, disturbing. A mother at the funeral of her child, smiling as if it were just another ordinary day. That photo would become the focal point of the prosecution's argument. It didn't fit the narrative of a grieving mother who had just lost everything. And the public, as well as the police, began to question. How could a mother, any mother, act this way after such a brutal loss? The inconsistencies in Darlie's behavior only fueled the suspicion that she wasn't the victim she claimed to be. But it wasn't just her behavior that raised eyebrows. There were deeper questions about motive. Why would anyone do such a thing? Why would a mother kill her own children? The theories started to emerge, and they painted a picture of a woman who might have had everything to gain from her son's deaths. The parallelogo. Some speculated that Darlie had murdered her children in a botched attempt to collect a life insurance policy. It seemed possible. Perhaps she had seen the death of her sons as a way out of her financial troubles. But there were other theories too. Some believed that Darlie had been struggling with her marriage, that she was involved in an affair, and that the killings were tied to a far more personal, desperate motivation. Others suggested that the crime might have been related to mounting debts, or perhaps the pressure of living a perfect suburban life. As the days wore on, the investigation began to take its toll on Darlie. But despite all the doubts and mounting evidence against her, she continued to maintain her innocence. She insisted that the attacks had been the work of an unknown intruder, someone who had broken into her home, murdered her children, and then attacked her, leaving her to die as well. However, as the evidence mounted, it became increasingly clear that the prosecution had a powerful case against Darlie. The inconsistencies in her story, her strange behavior, and the blood-stained sock were just the tip of the iceberg. As investigators pieced together the details, they began to see a very different picture emerging, one in which Darlie was not the victim, but the perpetrator. Darlie was arrested and taken away. There was great outcry, turning into a monstrous cooperation with the murder of her 2 children. The trial that followed would be one of the most controversial in recent history. The prosecution argued that Darlie's actions before, during, and after the attack were inconsistent with the behavior of a grieving mother. They presented her as someone who had plotted the murders with a cold, calculating mindset, driven by a desire to escape her troubles. On the other side, Darlie's defense team maintained that she was a victim of circumstance, someone who had been wrongly accused. They argued that she was the target of a broken justice system, a system that had made its mind up before all the facts were in. But the more the trial went on, the more the public seemed convinced that Darlie was guilty. The case became a media circus, filled with speculation, conspiracy theories, and public outrage. Was Darlie really the monster they said she was? Or was she an innocent woman trapped in a nightmare, the victim of a miscarriage of justice? As the trial unfolded, the question that haunted everyone was clear. What happened to Devon and Damon? And who was responsible for their deaths? The trial of Darlie Routier was nothing short of a spectacle. In 1997, after months of investigation, public scrutiny, and growing suspicion, Darlie found herself facing the most important battle of her life, the battle to prove her innocence. The case had already captured the nation's attention. The media had been following every detail, every twist, every turn. Darlie, once seen as a grieving mother, had become a symbol of controversy, her every move dissected by the public. The prosecution built its case around Darlie's strange behavior, her seemingly indifferent attitude after the deaths of her children, and the overwhelming evidence that suggested the crime scene had been staged. The bloody sock found in the alley, the broken window with no signs of forced entry, her smiles in photographs taken just days after the murders. These all became pivotal pieces of the puzzle that painted Darlie as the orchestrator of the crime, not the victim. But there was another side to the story. Darlie's defense team argued passionately that she had been wrongly accused, that the investigation had been rushed, and that crucial evidence had been overlooked. They pointed to inconsistencies in the prosecution's case, questions about the validity of the evidence, the rushed conclusions drawn by investigators, and the biases that may have influenced the trial. Despite the defense's efforts, the jury delivered its verdict in February of 1997. Darlie Routier was convicted of the murder of her youngest son, Damon. The case for her older son, Devon, was left murky, unsuspicious, unclear. The prosecution had made their case, and the jury had followed. Darlie was sentenced to death, and she was placed on death row in Texas, a state known for its swift and unforgiving justice. But even in the face of this damning conviction, there was something unsettling about the verdict. Many felt that Darlie had been wrongfully convicted, that the evidence against her was circumstantial at best, and the trial had been plagued with issues of bias, lack of proper investigation, and emotional influence. For years, Darlie maintained her innocence. She spoke out, insisting that she had been the victim of a botched investigation, a flawed trial, and a justice system that had made up its mind before all the facts had been properly considered, Callum said. As the years passed, public support for Darlie began to grow. A growing number of people believed she had been the victim of a miscarriage of justice, a mother who had lost everything, not because of her own doing, but because the system had failed her. They pointed to the lack of physical evidence tying her directly to the crime, the unanswered questions that still lingered. Our killers had never been caught. Darlie's case gained the attention of lawyers, journalists, and advocates who believed she deserved a fair re-examination. The evidence that was used to convict her has been called into question time and again. Was the crime scene truly staged? Could the bloody sock have been planted? Was Darlie simply in shock, her behavior skewed by grief and trauma? And what about the true killer being found? Why hadn't the true killer been found? As Darlie's appeals continue, the question remains, is she innocent? To this day, Darlie Routier remains on death row. The years have passed, but the case remains unresolved in many ways. There are those who still believe in her guilt, who argue that justice has been served, while others, many others, remain unconvinced, clinging to the hope that one day the truth will come out, that the real story will be told, and that justice will be done. Darlie has spent over 2 decades on death row, fighting for her freedom, for her innocence. She's never wavered in her belief that she was the victim of a senseless crime, a mother who had her life shattered in the blink of an eye. Whether the system failed her, or whether she truly did kill her children, remains a question that haunts the case to this day. What happened that night in the Routier home? Was it a tragic, unspeakable act of violence, or was it something far darker? Something that has yet to be uncovered. The case of Darlie Routier has captivated the world for nearly 30 years, and with every new twist, every new piece of evidence, the questions continue to mount. Was she the grieving mother, the victim, or a cold-blooded killer? For now, the truth remains locked in the courtroom, tangled in the web of public opinion, media frenzy, and a justice system that may have failed to see the full picture. The question still looms large. Who killed Devon and Damon Routier? And was their mother the one responsible? Or was she, as she claims, an innocent woman caught in the aftermath of an unimaginable tragedy? Now we want to hear from you. What do you think really happened that fateful night? Was Darlie Routier a loving mother caught in a tragic, senseless situation? Or, as the prosecution claimed, was she the cold-blooded killer who orchestrated the deaths of her own children? With so many unanswered questions, the truth is still unclear. What do you believe? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your take on this case, and maybe even your theories about what could have happened that night. Here. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that like button, share this video with anyone you think would be intrigued by this case, and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into real-life crimes and mysteries. There's always more to uncover, and we wouldn't want you to miss out. Thanks for watching, and until next time, keep questioning, keep searching for the truth. Good night.